Welcome to BloombergQuint Market Wrap. The Nifty was in a consolidation mode today, ending absolutely flat after seeing some minor gains yesterday. So if you look at the Nifty intraday chart, you can see it was trading in an absolutely narrow 31 odd point range today, but held about that 9300 level throughout the trading session. The bigger movement was of course in the currency markets, where the local currency, that is the Indian rupee, saw its largest drop since December. So that's the biggest fall in 2017. But coming back to the Nifty, we have Avinnash Gorakssakar who's joining us today. Avinnash, thank you for coming down here. Are we likely to see some time-wise correction in the Nifty index?
My sense is I think the markets would consolidate, and as long as liquidity continues to come in the markets, especially local funds have been seeing very large inflows from the SIP kind of flows. So I wouldn't be surprised that maybe around 9250 or 9300 the markets could consolidate. I think the markets are reacting to probably earnings numbers, which is going to be a busy month till the end of the month. And I think now with the French elections out, I think the near-term trigger for the markets would be the monsoon. With possibility of the El Nino coming up. I think markets are a little wary that whether this monsoon could turn out to be a little damp, and probably that could be now the next trigger after the earnings season.
Alright, so the India VIX was down 5.6% today, and you also said that we are seeing resistance strengthening at that 9400 level now.
That is correct. Given the fact that the Nifty is flat right now, we really haven't seen too much once again with respect to an accumulation open interest in the Nifty and the Bank Nifty futures. But when it comes to the open interest accumulation, the options open interest, we're looking at more and more accumulation in addition towards open interest in the 9400 and 9500 levels. That is the 9400, 9500 calls. On the lower end, we are looking at once again some addition in the 9300 puts, which gives us a rough range as to where we can see the Nifty move between. But once again, with respect to the Nifty Bank, we've seen some pressure on account of mixed earnings, but we are looking at a little more accumulation than as compared to the Nifty. And that also brings me to the question on the Nifty Bank. Do you see this move do you see the Nifty Bank moving forward?
No, I think clearly, the kind of numbers which have come out by the PSU banks, some of them have been good. In fact, today Dena Bank came out with a very dismal set of numbers.
Right.
So I would believe that the Bank Nifty could consolidate and probably see a little bit of cooling off before it moves up ahead. My sense is it's moved up significantly. So clearly, some amount of cooling off could happen. I think now the markets are probably going to expect some good numbers from the frontline banks like SBI,
right.
Bank of Baroda, and if any positive surprise comes from these banks, I think that could be a key reason for the Bank Nifty to move.
Right. Shraddha, you have been looking at at least the banking earnings that just came today,
Absolutely.
Mixed overall.
Absolutely, yes, Agam. So in whichever bank that reported earnings, wherever we saw that the gross NPAs were coming down marginally, that stocks saw a positive reaction, whereas those with that were reported further stress build up actually saw their share prices taking a knock. So if you talk about Dena Bank, the net loss widened from 326 crores to 575 crores. Gross NPAs also jumped nearly 150 basis points just on a sequential basis, and hence that stock gave up as much as 5%. Vijaya Bank rose to its 7-year highs after Q4 PAT more than double. Gross NPAs came down marginally, 6.98% to 6.59% on a sequential basis. So that stock really did well. Syndicate Bank also similar reaction like we saw in the case of Vijaya Bank. It swung back into profit in Q4, and though the shares did come off at close, it rose as much as 4.5% in the immediate reaction post the earnings numbers. There also gross NPAs came down from 8.69% to 8.5%. We already have Avinnash's view on banks. So let's also take a look at how some of the Nifty index constituents did today. It was Indian Oil Corp, Adani Ports and L&T which were leading the gainers, all sitting with gains of over 2%. Axis Bank was also catching up 1.5% higher for that private sector bank. On the other hand, Hero MotoCorp lost about 3.5% ahead of its earnings tomorrow. We also have Bharti Airtel, which was down nearly 2% ahead of its earnings, which are later today evening. Indiabulls Housing Finance, on the other hand, was seeing profit booking after 2 straight days of gains. Lupin and Aurobindo Pharma trading lower on account of the issues revolving around the US FDA plant inspections. Avinnash, any thoughts on pharma stocks, given that these regulatory issues and inspections continue, and all of them are at least probably to some extent priced in? And any pharma stock that you like right now?
No, I think clearly within the pharma pack, I think some amount of consolidation and some amount of challenging headwinds would continue. I think recently we have now come across reports saying that Lupin probably would be the next stock which would possibly have some US FDA kind of inspection. But overall, broadly, if you see stocks like Aurobindo Pharma or Lupin, or for that reason Sun Pharma, I would believe that the coming quarter is yet going to be a challenging quarter. We may see a little bit of correction and softness in these stocks until we really see some sort of core earnings kind of traction coming in. So I would believe that probably if one were to look at a really longer term kind of picture, then one could start accumulating. But otherwise, in the near term, the challenging headwinds would continue for some time.
All right, moving on, Agam, Godrej Consumer Products was clearly our non-index stock of the day today. What went right with earnings this time around, and what drove earnings, in comparison to some of its peers?
Sure. So if you consider the top line, it was more or less in line with street expectations. We're looking at a domestic volumes growth of around 5%. The real surprise was perhaps in the margins, because the gross margins expanded well over 200 basis points, and this is on account of raw materials cost curtail. We saw growth in raw materials cost, but if you take that as a ratio to revenues, that ratio has reduced on a year-on-year basis. Moving on, its ad spends, and as we have seen in several other consumer companies as well, has been curtailed, and that's also led to an expansion of well over 250 basis points when it comes to your EBITDA margins. It's also the reason why we're looking at a growth in profitability. Of course, to a certain extent, this also has to do with your base quarter having an exceptional loss. But Avinnash, once again, when I compare Godrej Consumers to the numbers that we have seen in Dabur and Marico, Godrej Consumers is a little bit of surprise. We haven't seen such spectacular numbers for the other guys. What is your take on it, especially given the valuations at which all these three stocks are going?
No, I think definitely positive surprise in terms of the margins, and as you rightly pointed out, cost cutting has definitely resulted in the EBITDA margins going up. I would believe that if commodity prices remain the way they are, and if probably they take a stand that advertising spends are going to be curtailed at least for a couple of quarters,
right,
till volume growth kicks in much faster,
right,
I would believe that the markets could be positively surprised in terms of earnings traction. In fact, this number is much better than what the street overall expected, and that way, the FMCG sector, I would say that Godrej Consumer has been a good outperformer and would be a outperformer if you compare it to Dabur, which actually under-delivered on the volume growth side.
Right. Right.
Another stock that saw stellar reaction to earnings was ABB India, which rose as much as 13%. That's the highest level in a decade after strong order inflows in the first quarter. Order inflows jumped about 28%. But Agam, the broader market breadth still remains positive.
Sure, it is. So we're looking at just about 4 gainers for about 3 losers. And let's take a look at some of these mid-cap stocks in here. So with respect to gainers, we have Magma Corp, which has gone up by as much as 10.2%. CG Power has also followed. As we were mentioning, Godrej Consumer and ABB India, each of these have gained well over 8.5–9%. Himachal Futuristics, Bajaj Hindustan and GET&D have also gained well over 7%. Now let's take a look at some of the losers now. We have Trident losing out 8%. Dena Bank again reacting to earnings, down 6%. Canara Bank as well. Aegis Logistics, Shilpi Cable Technologies continues to lose, hitting another 5% lower circuit. Union Bank and Hero MotoCorp, of course, ahead of its earnings, we are looking at weakness, but that, of course, is a large cap stock. But, not unlike yesterday, we have seen some gains coming in, especially when the momentum still stands with the gainers. And that actually brings me to the question, do you see any opportunities in the mid-cap space where you feel that this stock still needs to catch up with the others in spears?
No, I think we've seen a lot of action in the cement counters.
Right.
And I would believe that India Cements definitely deserves a better kind of multiple and some sort of re-rating if one were to look at its geographical capacity and the kind of pricing power it enjoys.
Right.
So I would believe that if one were to take a slightly medium to longer term call, I think India Cements definitely in terms of valuations and catching up with the other cement majors, there could be a kind of a re-rating here, and I think value could be made if one were to look at the next 12-15 odd months.
Right. Right.
All right. Also, in terms of IPO updates, you have Hutco, which has been subscribed 1.55 times on day 2 so far. And of course, you had the sort of muted debut for publishing company S Chance. It listed at 700 on NSE, so a premium of about 4% to the issue price of 670. Avinnash, once again, any thoughts on any of these or advice on any of these two IPOs, and what somebody who has been allotted shares in SJAN actually do, given that there are some concerns around valuations?
No, I think clearly, it's a good company, it's a good business model and a very old player, but the kind of price the stock was offered, I think there was very little less on the table for investors. So I would believe that unless the stock actually comes down to a reasonable level, I don't think you're going to see a major kind of earnings surprise. They are largely a book publishing company, and the fourth quarter is typically a very bumper quarter for them. So clearly, I think one should be careful. I think this is a good company, but probably the valuations still look quite a bit pricey. And I would believe that the markets could possibly look at the first set of quarterly numbers which the company would put up. Any letdown in these numbers would probably mean that the stock would definitely come under further pressure.
All right, thank you so much once again, Avinnash, for joining us. That's all we have today. Thank you for watching.